This meeting is being recorded.
All right, thanks for your patience as we shifted gears. So now that you have a very good understanding of elasticity, now I need to talk about a little bit deeper the supply, demand, and government policies, and really how these government policies impact supply and demand. Uh, Since we're talking about macroeconomics, we're studying the greater economy from a country perspective. Okay, so the whole United States, we're examining the effects of supply and demand from a global perspective. Okay, but we study it on the country level because each country has their own policies that influence things like supply and demand for those respective countries. So, the first thing I want to talk about today is, or for this chapter, is price controls. Some policymakers in Congress believe that the market price of a good and service is unfair to buyers or sellers, meaning there are inequities. Can be somewhat true for certain things. I think about housing. If you know anything about the housing market in 2024, you know that the prices of housing have gotten kind of out of control, right? It's very, very expensive this year to purchase a house or to afford rent even in the same neighborhood, right? We know that price of housing has really, I think, in my opinion, it has outpaced inflation by quite a bit, and it's made it difficult for new homeowners or potential homeowners to buy a home or to rent a decent place. And so this creates what we call inequality. Inequality means that we're not on the same playing field. Okay? So policymakers, they try to, in Congress, they try to create new policy or laws around certain parts of our economy. So I think about housing. So what can Congress do in order to help to create more affordable housing options? Well, they can craft law to help to address this inequality of pricing. Okay, what can be done? We could do tax credits. We could do some type of down payment assistance. We can do some type of other programs, right? So that's what the government policymakers think about doing in order to address such inequality. The other thing that they do to control prices, to make things a little bit more, I guess, fair in their opinion, is to change taxes, the tax rates. In order for the government to raise revenue, to fund the government and the government public ventures, they raise taxes in order to raise revenue. How else can they do it, right? If you think about the government, the federal government as a business, in order for the business to raise revenue, the government needs to raise taxes. Tax collection is how the government operates, right? And so a change in tax policy has an impact on more than just the citizens. It also impacts the markets. Why? Because a change in the tax rate changes the outcome of markets. If my taxes go up, I have less discretionary funds to buy certain things with. Which means if I have less discretionary funds to buy certain things with, those businesses I was going to buy from, they've lost revenue. You see? So it becomes a really sticky situation when it comes to taxes for that reason. I don't like to call it a catch-22 because it's not, but it's also not good, right? So that's why the government's really careful about what they do with taxes. Tax goes up, that's good for them. It's good for the government because they're able to fund all these other government programs. Okay? They can take care of Social Security, they can take care of Medicare, Medicaid, education, infrastructure, etc. Right? All of those things are paid by taxpayers. The taxes that the government collects from all the taxpayers, that's how they pay for those things. Right? And so they can do that if they raise the taxes. They could do more of that. However, the negative side of that is that the citizens that are paying the taxes, they're not going to be able to buy all the things that they wanted or that they could have bought without the tax increase. So they'll buy less things. And when they buy less things, that hurts the businesses, right? That hurts the local businesses. So it's really a very delicate situation, the taxes. So another way that the government tries to help is by what they call creating a price ceiling. A price ceiling. This is the legal maximum on the price at which a good or service can be sold. An example of this is rent control. In New York City, they have what's called rent control laws. The city implements these laws. And what this means is every year when the rent usually goes up, it can only go up by a certain percentage, like 3% or 5%, or what I don't even know what it is today, but I imagine it's probably somewhere around there. So every year, rent can only go up by 3 or 5% in New York City. That's called rent control. In other cities, some cities, jurisdictions, they have this rent control law in place. It creates what's called a price ceiling. The rent can only go up by that percentage every year. They cap it, right? It's a maximum. That's one example of this type of rent, the price ceiling. Another example, if you've ever stayed at a hotel, on the back of the hotel room door, they have the list of all of the local laws and the policies of the hotel. And they also publish what's called the rack rate. For those of you in the hotel business, you know what I'm talking about. It's called the rack rate, or the maximum rate allowed. So when you stay in a hotel room next time, read the sign on the back of the door. Toward the bottom, you're going to see, and it's going to say maximum rate, maximum rental rate, or whatever. And oftentimes it's something ridiculous, like $1,200 a night. All right, that probably will never charge it, but it's there. It's published there. Yeah, that's because the law says that they have price ceiling, most they can charge. In some instances, we also have what's called a price floor. This is the least amount we can charge, a minimum law. An example of a price floor is the minimum wage law. In certain jurisdictions, minimum wage is like, I think the federal minimum wage is something silly, like $7 an hour or something crazy low like that. That's the federal minimum wage. I don't think anyone can survive on that. I don't think it's possible. The uh, the district, I forget what the wage is now. I think it's close to 15 an hour. If not, it's getting up there, right? So I remember when they passed that law, I think they were going to stagger it in, right? So it's not a big burden to the employers all at once. But that's what we call a floor. It's the minimum wage. It's the least you can pay somebody legally, right? So that's an example of a price floor. So how do these price ceilings and floors affect the market outcomes? Well, the ceilings, they're not binding, but they're set above the equilibrium price. What I mean here is that in a place like New York City where they have the rent control, typically the landlords set the price to rent the apartment above the equilibrium price. But they cannot go above that certain rate every year. It doesn't have an effect on the price or the quantity sold. But it does bind when it comes to what we call a shortage. The sellers must ration scarce resources. I don't know if any of you noticed, but because there's so many people moving to the cities, there's not enough apartments for them. But there's just not enough. It's a scarce resource. So the sellers must ration the scarce resource, the apartments. This creates long lines and can cause discrimination. So, it's not all good news when the government implements these types of price ceilings. So here we have the price ceiling. I'm going to keep using the example of the rent. Rent goes at the equilibrium 3 at 100. The rent will be set above that. Okay, $3.50. We know that it can only go up to 4 because that's where the ceiling is. And that ceiling is going to go up every year, but only by 3%. If the price ceiling falls below equilibrium, it creates a shortage. Okay. And here's a similar example with gasoline. We see the price ceiling there on the left, non-binding. And then when the implementation of the ceiling goes into place, we see a shift in the quantity and in the price, but not above the ceiling. So are these rent controls and price ceilings a good thing? Most people would probably say no. I mean, the landlords were going to say no. From an economics perspective, it's good for the consumer to some degree, but anytime the government interferes with the freedom of the market, I don't see it as a good thing. But that's just my opinion. And here's the effect on short term, long term. The short term, yeah, no problem. It's not great, but there's still going to be a shortage on the short term. On the long term, it becomes more elastic, right? Short term, inelastic. Long term, elastic, right? Just what we talked about in the last chapter. A continuation of that, and we're introducing rent control and the ceilings. we can see short term still inelastic, but long term it becomes elastic. See, it's not sustainable over time. So that's price ceilings, which means the price cannot go above that threshold legally. And it usually goes up like 3% a year, something like that. What about price floors? This is the minimum. So an example of this, as I had mentioned, would be minimum wage. It's not binding, and there'd be no effect on the market. When it's binding, meaning the minimum wage, it's usually set above the equilibrium price, and the sellers are unable to sell what they want. In other words, because of minimum wage, the employers cannot pay below that, but they also can't pay too much above that because of the restrictions. It's not really desirable. The idea behind this is that when there's a minimum set into place, that it's a restriction set on the employer. And it makes it difficult for the employer to be able to pay even more than the minimum because of those restrictions. It interferes with the free market. So on the left side, we see non-binding, and the right side, we see binding, and we can see where the differences come into play. Ultimately, employers should be paying above the minimum wage. But again, with restrictions based off of supply and demand, it becomes difficult to do that. You see? So you can tell that this book was only published a few years ago. It's still relatively new. But I like this one, right? If the federal minimum wage is raised gradually to $15 an hour by 2020, the employment rate for will still substantially be lower than it would under the status quo. I think this one's kind of BS, to be honest. Here's why. The book doesn't take into consideration today's environment. Fast forward 4 more years. Okay, the minimum wage is still not $15 an hour. This is 4 years ago that they wanted the federal minimum to be $15. It's still like $7 and something, right? Here's the thing. What the publisher of the book didn't take into consideration is the changes in the labor force. We have a lot of older citizens retiring. Right? It makes sense. A lot of the people above age 65 are retiring. There were a lot of people in that age group, right? There's a lot of people in that age group. There are less people below that age. What does that mean? It means that there's a lot of unfilled jobs. As they retire, there's no one behind them to fill the gap. So that causes a low unemployment rate. It's simple. It's simple math, right? Low unemployment. I mean, you think about it, you hear it in the news, right? You hear, people in the IT field, they're going to get laid off. It's going to be bad. But the reality is, it's temporarily bad for them. The unemployment rate has been historically low for a couple of years now, and it's going to stay that way. Why? Because there ain't enough people to work. It's simple. Len, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question. Why is it that the economists never account for uh, the diagram flow chart way of looking at the economy and look compensation that normally is on the end of uh, thinking about the amount of revenue and the amount of orders and the amount of waste. And when you factor in the employees' compensation, at the end of the day, it leads to an employee saving, which brings the equilibrium to the larger economy.
Correct.
And like in a moment like now where we have inflation, you might have more people start saving um, if they had an influx of money in the flyover country, everywhere else outside of the cities where they literally have people that are living on $7 or $10 an hour,
Sure.
in Idaho and Kansas and places we don't even hear about that are living multiple generations off of food stamps and minimum
Right.
wage, that deserve economic equality. They would actually stimulate their local environment. It would put tax dollars into the revenue of the local government and into the local businesses, because the lower your income is, the less you save and the more you put back into the economy, which helps. And the fact that they have the extra revenue from coming in that help the overall equilibrium be stabilized,
Yep. That's
at a
right.
time right now where we're losing,
Yep.
instead of raising, and just another way, instead of raising the rate up and down these fractions of points, this seems like something that's been overdue, because we were talking about it before Obama. And I'm a political advocate, and I go door to door all across the country for different things. I've gotten laws passed. And this, what you said, is so accurate. It's so overdue. And I just don't understand why do economists don't look at the long term of what the wages are, even on the bad side of that, where you have employees that won't save at all. The employees that won't save at all are spurring their economy. Those people, their money is going all in. They're not saving. That dollar doesn't stay in their house for 30 days. It's going right back into the
That's right.
economy. That means you got pure profit if you own a restaurant, if you own a chain place. And that's what we do best here, is eat fast food and stuff like that in America. It's just, I don't see why we just can't capitalize off of some of the things that hurt us to just to stabilize some of the things like this. I just wanted to hear your answer. Thank you for listening to my long question.
Yeah. No,
Sorry,
no,
class.
it's a good rant, Len, because it's true. And the reality behind that is some economists do look at what we call it the efficiency rate, and we look at the efficiency rate. But I got to tell you, and this goes back to the old, I call it the old world, old way of thinking. And the old way of thinking is like the bell curve and the Laffer curve. And Art Laffer, he's still around, and he's still doing his thing. But the reality is the Laffer curve is very out of date. And they didn't take into consideration, at least in modern economics, they just didn't take into consideration the efficiency rates. And oftentimes I think about like what are the outputs? It's like, okay, so we're adding the gross domestic product. The companies are trying to operate at their most efficient levels of output. Great, but we don't look at it we don't apply that same logic on a national scale. And I think that's where the biggest pain points are. And to your point, Len, I think that there could be a lot more stabilization if they just run it like an actual business. That's but politicians are not business people. So it's just, and oftentimes they kind of listen to themselves, and it's just a big echo chamber, and they don't listen to the actual people doing the work. Just my 2 cents on it. And that brings us to our next point, which we can see here on the left side is a free labor market, which is what we're supposed to have. I mean, that's what U.S. was founded on. And but do we have it? No. It's not free. It's not a free market. It's a labor market with binding minimum wage. And so what does it do? It creates an even larger gap of unemployment. When in reality, it should be the open market dictating, the wages paid. Not It shouldn't be dictated by this sense of whatever it is now. All this red tape. You can tell I'm a free economist type of person. I think very very plainly about certain things. It's just my viewpoint. Markets are usually a good way to organize the economy, as you know. We look at grouping like things together. So if you're buying and selling shares of stock, you go to certain exchanges for those shares depending on the company, right? We group them like things together. Like on the NASDAQ, it's mostly tech stocks, right? On the S&P 500, it's mostly what we call home staples, so forth and so on. So we organize our markets in like things. We group them together. Economists typically oppose price ceilings and floors because of the influence from government. Prices are not the outcome of the same or haphazard process. Prices for a crucial job of balancing the supply and demand. Yet, all I'm saying here is that we group like things together, keep it organized, and try not to let the government interfere too much. Of course, yes, sometimes government interference can be a good thing to some degree. We mitigate bias, we mitigate discrimination, we mitigate. We try to help the less fortunate, the lower income. The government tries to help them, right? Yes, those are great things. So rent control helps with those things, definitely. It helps to level the playing field. But it can also hurt them as well. It can hurt those same people in the way of rent subsidies and wage subsidies, right? Or also known as earned income tax credits. The reason why economists like myself don't like these things like rent subsidies and wage subsidies, it doesn't always, the intention is there to help the people that need these benefits or these subsidies. We want to help them. But unfortunately, it ends up hurting them in the long run because they get stuck in a cycle of this government assistance. So, that's another shift, right? Short-term inelastic, long-term elastic. Taxes. Please don't get me started. We've got a few minutes. I'll complain about taxes over those few minutes. Government uses our taxes for roads, schools, national defense, etc. National defense, as you know, takes up the majority of our government taxes. We're not going to go down that road because it's another pain point. But government uses our taxes, and they're supposed to use them in a good way, and most of the time they do. But other things go unnoticed. It's a burden. A tax is a burden, but it's shared among all of the market participants, which is typically everyone in the country. If you're buying something, you're paying tax on that thing. If you're working, you're paying taxes. If you're living, you're paying taxes. We all share the burden. Taxes on sellers might affect the outcomes. Yeah, as the businesses get taxed, it takes away from gross domestic product. Ultimately, there's a shift in the supply curve to the left, higher equilibrium price, lower quantities. The tax reduces all the size of the market overall. That's if the tax is on the sellers. If it's on the buyers, fine. That's fine. You can tax the people buying the goods and services, but don't tax the sellers, because when you do that, it creates smaller markets. Actually hurts it. So here we can see the effect of taxes on the seller from an ice cream vendor perspective, salesperson perspective. That the tax makes up a big difference of their revenue. So if part of their revenue is going for taxes, we can see that there's going to be a shift in that supply. They can't buy as much because they're paying more in taxes, right? So buyers and sellers, they face the same type of inequality when it comes to taxes. Taxes typically discourage market activity. Buyers and sellers share the tax of the burden. They both pay taxes. The person selling you the good, they pay taxes on the raw materials to make that good for you. And you're paying taxes on the purchase of that same good. So double taxation, right, on goods and services. Those taxes, of course, go to good things, but it makes both buyers and sellers a little worse off because of it. Because we both end up having to pay higher prices because of those taxes. So what's the initial impact on the buyers? On the buyer's side, the impact's on the demand. If the tax is going to be high on certain products, I'm going to buy less of it. Simple, right? Lower the tax, I'll buy more of it. So we see the same type of effect on the buyer's side. That's what this shows us. So on the buyer's side of things, so buyers and sellers, we share the burden of tax. We both have to pay the tax. Sellers get lower price. The buyers have to pay more. So taxes are ultimately hurting both sides of the coin. But again, the taxes are necessary in order to fund all of the government operations. So it drives a wedge in between how much the buyers pay for the goods and services and how much the sellers receive. Right, that difference is the tax. And of course, employers also have to pay what we call payroll taxes. Employees pay the state, local, federal tax, right, out of your paycheck. On the employer side, they pay the federal, state unemployment, federal unemployment, and Social Security, Medicare. So your employer matches dollar for dollar, basically. So the employer technically paying the same amount of tax that you are. So once again, elasticity comes into play. Short term, inelastic. Long term, elastic. That's what you need to know about it. And we can see that graphed here, the relationship between supply and taxation and demand. Here we have it introduced with and without tax but we can see it's relatively inelastic. And the last thing we'll talk about here is that tax burden falls heavily on both sides of the marketplace. So ultimately, both sides pay. Both sides are a little worse off because of it, but the greater economy or as a whole is better because of the use of the taxes on the government side. Okay, I got off my tax bracket right. Now let's talk about what we need to do for this week, and I'll let you go. So, for this week, we have 2 action items for you to take care of. Number 1 is the hypothesis. Very similar process to the one you did 2 weeks ago. With this one, you're going to do your original post and respond to 2 of your classmates. Just like I said in my earlier message today, in order for you to be successful on all discussion boards and hypothesis, We're looking for one original post and responses to 2 of your classmates. And I'll also say that a 3-word response is not going to count. Okay? Come on, give me a paragraph at least. A couple words is not, you're not going to get nothing for that. Okay? It's got to be substantial. So that's hypothesis. And then the chapter 5 and 6 quiz that's combined. So it's just those 2 items that I need you to knock out before Sunday. So try to do the hypothesis on Wednesday. Yeah, use the class time on Wednesday to do the hypothesis. And if you have additional time on Wednesday, knock out the quiz too. And then you'll be ahead of the game. Right? It's nice to get ahead sometimes, which leads me to my next point. If you feel like you want to work ahead in this class, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. Everything's open. The whole class is open. If you want to go back and finish something that you didn't finish, do it. I want you to. The only way you can pass this class is to do all the work. I said that at the very beginning of the class, and I'm going to keep saying it. The only way you can pass this class is to do all the work. If you don't do the work, you won't pass. It's really that simple. So feel free to go back and do some work that maybe you missed, and also feel free to work ahead. You know, my job is to help you pass this course and to understand a few things about economics. So as long as we work together, we will make it happen. And I hope you all feel good about that. Any comments, questions, or concerns that I can help you with before I let you go? Y'all good? Sure? Allison, we good?
Good.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So my question is, for finals, right?
Yeah.
If we already have a A in your class, do we have to do finals?
Yes. You can't miss any exam. You can't miss nothing in this class.
Okay.
You miss a
Okay,
final,
making sure.
your grade is going to drop from an A to a C real quick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, don't skip nothing. Don't skip the
Okay.
exams. Don't skip the quizzes. Don't skip the discussions. Don't skip the hypothesis. Don't skip anything. Because I'm telling you, you skip it, you in trouble.
Okay.
So yeah, good question. Yeah, don't skip that. Oh boy. Great. Yeah. Len. Yeah, Len. Feel free. If any of y'all want to do like a study group with Len, Len's looking to form a study group. So reach out to Len if you're interested in doing a study group. Len, you can post in the ask the professor form or the help form, whatever. Y'all could get together and study. That's fine. No problem with that. So yeah, anyone wants to join Len and form a study group, have at it. Absolutely. Any other comments, questions, or concerns? All right. Thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate your time. And if you ever need anything, you know how to get me. Email me, call me, set up office hours. I'm here for you. Appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Hey,
night.
everybody stay blessed. Have a great one.
You too.
You too.
Take
Bye.
care now.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Bye bye.